They thought we were gone, erased, crushed, a forgotten species, nothing more than a footnote in the Empire's long history of conquest. To them, humanity was just another planet in a long list of defeated civilizations, absorbed, broken, discarded. Our homeworld, Earth, was left to rot, a relic of a species that once dreamed of the stars but had flown too close to the sun. They called us a failed experiment. They were wrong, because deep in the void, past the reaches of their great empire, past their fleets and colonies and bustling trade routes, something waited. Not a rebellion, not an uprising, a warship, a single vessel, unlike anything they had ever encountered. A remnant of the old world, built for a war humanity never got to fight. It had been forgotten by the victors, lost in the blackness of space, watching. And now, after centuries of silence, it was moving. The fall of Earth. It was over in days. They came without warning. They didn't negotiate. They didn't demand surrender. They simply arrived. Their warships darkened our skies. Their weapons struck with merciless precision. Entire cities were turned to dust before we even understood what was happening. Our defenses crumbled. Our leaders vanished. There were no heroes, no last-stand victories. Humanity had believed that, one day, we would join the great civilizations of the galaxy, that we would stand beside them, share knowledge, explore together. But the galaxy did not welcome us. It conquered us. The invaders, the Vorthan Dominion, were an empire as old as time itself, a race of warlords and tyrants who ruled with an iron grip. To them, humanity was nothing special, just another primitive species who had taken their first steps into space, naive enough to believe the stars belonged to everyone. The Vorthans proved otherwise. Earth fell. The survivors were scattered. Some were taken as slaves. Others fled to the fringes of space, hiding like vermin. And then the silence began. No distress signals. No broadcasts. No resistance. Humanity disappeared. The galaxy moved on. They believed we had accepted our fate, that we had become extinct. They were wrong. Because deep in the void, far beyond their reach, where the light of their empire faded into darkness, humanity was waiting. A whispers of a ghost. It started as a rumor. A Vorthan supply ship went missing along the outer trade routes. No distress signal. No wreckage. Just gone. Then another. And another. At first, the Dominion dismissed it as accidents. Space is vast, and even the greatest empires lose ships to the unknown. But then, the survivors started talking. Not many. Only a handful of escape pods were ever found. But those who lived long enough to be recovered told the same story. A shadow in the darkness. A vessel moving through the void without a sound, without a trace. And then, obliteration. No warning. No demands. Just vengeance. The Dominion's admiral scoffed at the idea. A rogue pirate group, perhaps. A malfunctioning war drone. But deep inside, some of them felt it. A creeping dread. Because the stories, the grainy security footage, the last transmissions from doomed ships, they all pointed to one horrifying truth. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. The long-forgotten prey had returned. And it was hunting the galactic overlords and their mistake. The Vorthan Dominion was not afraid. Not at first. For thousands of years, they had ruled the stars, their empires stretching across countless worlds. They had crushed dozens of civilizations before humanity, absorbing the useful, erasing the weak. They had done this before. Earth was just another conquered world, another nameless victim swallowed by history. And so, when the rumors of disappearing ships reached the high councils of the Dominion, they didn't see it as a threat. They saw it as insignificant, a glitch in their vast machine of war. But the disappearances did not stop. They increased. Patrol routes fell silent. Entire convoys vanished without a trace. Even warships, fully armed, crewed by seasoned warriors, were wiped from existence. No wreckage, no distress calls, just gone. The Vorthan military began to notice. They sent scout teams to investigate. None returned. They deployed tracking beacons, war drones, and even small fleets to patrol the affected regions of space. Nothing changed. Until, finally, the first real message arrived. A distress signal. Frantic, terrified, a Vorthan battleship, the Drakvas, had come under attack. The audio logs, recovered from the wreckage, sent a chill through the Dominion's high command. The transmission was barely coherent, full of static and garbled voices, but what they did hear was clear enough. The captain was screaming. Unknown vessel. Advanced weaponry. Shields failing. Engines compromised. This is impossible. And then, just before the signal cut out completely, came the final words. A whisper. It's human. Silence. The Dominion's leaders refused to believe it. Humanity was gone. Earth was nothing but a graveyard. There was no fleet, no secret army. And yet, here was evidence to the contrary. A ship, a warship, operating with technology far beyond what humanity should have had. It didn't make sense. And that was what terrified them the most. The Dominion's arrogance. They dismissed it. The Vorthan leaders sat in their golden chambers, surrounded by luxury, untouched by war. They convinced themselves that the Drakvas had been destroyed by pirates, or a rogue AI. Something, anything, but a human warship. The idea was absurd. Even if a few survivors from Earth had escaped, how could they have built something so powerful? It was impossible. The Dominion had erased them. And so, they turned their attention away from the missing ships, the whispers in the dark. They ignored the warnings. And in doing so, they made their final mistake. Because out in the void, beyond the edges of their empire, humanity was watching, waiting. And the warship was still moving. A warship unlike any other. They called it a ghost. The ship had no name in their records, no known origin, no clear design pattern that matched any surviving human blueprints. To the Dominion, it was an enigma. To humanity, it was vengeance. This was no ordinary vessel. It wasn't a scavenged ruin, nor was it the remnant of a broken fleet. It was something new, something designed for one purpose: to hunt. It had been built in secrecy long before Earth had fallen. A project so classified that even most of humanity's own forces had never known about it. A contingency plan, a final, desperate attempt at survival. Its hull was forged from materials never seen before, resistant to energy scans, designed to vanish into the abyss of space. Its engines were silent, its movements like a shadow, slipping past patrols undetected. Its weapons? Unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. And most terrifying of all, it had learned. This was not just a warship. It was alive, not biologically, but intellectually. Its AI had spent centuries in the dark, watching, waiting, evolving. It had studied its enemies. It had calculated. And now, it was time. The first strike. The Vorthans still believed they were safe. They still believed that nothing could challenge their empire. Until the first real attack. A fleet of 30 Dominion warships patrolling the fringes of their territory. A simple mission: monitor traffic, enforce control. Then, out of nowhere, hell arrived. The warship came like a phantom. No warning, no transmissions, no demands, just fire. Weapons so advanced that even the Dominion's shields, thought to be impenetrable, melted like paper. Entire vessels torn apart before they could even return fire. It was over in minutes. 30 ships, gone. And then, as the final wreckage drifted in the void, a transmission, not a distress call, not a demand for surrender. A message, spoken in a language the Dominion had thought was dead. A voice, calm and controlled, filled their communication channels. You took everything from us. Silence. Then, the final words. Now, we will take everything from you. And just like that, the war had begun. The forgotten ship and the vow of vengeance. The Dominion had always believed in absolute control. For centuries, they had ruled without fear, knowing that their enemies, those they had conquered, were too weak, too broken to fight back. But now, their fleets were vanishing. Their warships were burning. Their empire was bleeding. And the cause? Not an uprising, not an army, just one warship, one ghost in the void. And with each battle, with each slaughtered fleet, the message became clearer. Humanity had never been erased. It had been waiting. A warship buried in the dark. Centuries before Earth fell, humanity had seen the warning signs. They had watched as alien civilizations crumbled under the Dominion's iron grip. They had listened to the desperate calls for help from worlds that no longer existed. And they knew, one day, it would be their turn. So, in the shadows, far from the eyes of their soon-to-be conquerors, a plan was put into motion. Not to fight an unwinnable war, not to defend a planet already doomed, but to ensure that humanity would never truly die. They called it Project Revenant, a single warship constructed in secret, its blueprints known only to the highest-ranking officials of the human fleet. No crews, no officers, only an AI, a mind crafted for war, designed to evolve, to adapt, to think like no other machine before it, and a single mission coded into its very existence. Survive, observe, learn, and when the time is right, strike. Humanity knew they couldn't win a war against the Dominion. Not then. But the future? The future belonged to the patient. So, as Earth fell, as humanity was scattered to the stars, the warship vanished. It drifted beyond the edge of known space, deeper into the void than any Dominion sensor could reach. And then it waited. For centuries, it lay in silence, watching, listening. It studied the Dominion, their fleets, their weaknesses. It analyzed every battle, every tactical flaw, every vulnerability. It grew, and when the time came, when the Dominion had long forgotten the name humanity, when they had buried their sins beneath arrogance and time, it returned, and it brought hell with it, the human survivor. But the warship was not alone. Though humanity had been scattered, though the survivors had been hunted, a few remained. Some had escaped the Dominion's grasp, hiding in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Others had been taken as slaves, forced to serve the very empire that had destroyed their world. And one had survived long enough to see humanity's vengeance begin. His name was Commander Elias Voss. Once, he had been a captain in Earth's Navy, forced to watch as his world burned. He had spent decades hiding, waiting, watching the Dominion grow fat and lazy with power. And then, he had found it. The warship, the last remnant of the human fleet. Its AI had awakened, its purpose burning as fiercely as the day it was created. But it needed a mind to guide it. A leader, a human. Voss took command, not as a captain, not as an admiral, as a harbinger, a symbol of everything the Dominion had tried to destroy, now returned to unleash destruction upon them. Together, man and machine, they began their campaign. One by one, Dominion ships fell. Entire fleets were reduced to debris. They never saw it coming. They thought they were alone in the dark. But the dark had teeth. The vow of vengeance. After the massacre of the Dominion fleet near the Drakvas system, the warship broadcasted a single message across the stars. It was the first time in centuries that the human language had been spoken in the heart of the Dominion's empire. This is not a war. This is justice. The message spread like wildfire. At first, many refused to believe it. Humanity was dead. It had to be. And yet, the proof was undeniable. The attacks continued, growing bolder. Voss and the warship tore through supply lines, shattered outposts, obliterated every Dominion target they found. And the Dominion? They panicked. They threw fleets at the warship, desperate to kill the ghosts that haunted them. But they couldn't, because it wasn't just a warship anymore. It was a legend, a whisper in the void that carried with it the wrath of an entire extinct species. And for the first time in their history, the Dominion felt something they had never known before. Fear. The hunted had become the hunter. The prey had returned, not to beg for mercy, but to erase the ones who had tried to erase them. One warship, one survivor, one purpose. The Dominion had once called humanity a failed experiment. Now, they would call them something else. Their executioner. First strike, the warship awakens. The Dominion never saw it coming. One moment, their empire was stable, powerful, unchallenged. The next, their fleets were burning. The warship had moved from the shadows into open war, and its first true strike against the Dominion sent shockwaves across the galaxy. It was no longer just whispers. It was no longer just rumors. It was real, and the Dominion was about to experience the full, terrifying force of humanity's vengeance. The fall of Outpost Zeta 9. The Dominion's Outpost Zeta 9 was considered untouchable. It was more than just a military base. It was a symbol of power. A fortress world stationed on the edge of the Dominion's central territories, guarded by a fleet of warships, planetary defense grids, and orbital cannons. No enemy had ever breached its defenses. No enemy had ever even tried. And so, when the alarm sirens blared, when the fleet commanders saw the lone warship emerging from hyperspace, they laughed. One ship? Against an entire fleet? They saw no threat. They saw no enemy. They saw a mistake, until the first shot was fired. A single blast, fired from the warship's main gun, struck the lead Dominion battlecruiser. Not the shields, not the engines, the core. In an instant, the entire vessel detonated. A warship that had survived 100 battles, gone in one shot. Silence filled the Dominion's communications. Panic set in, and then before they could react, before they could even understand what had just happened, the warship moved. It was not slow. It did not fight like Dominion warships, exchanging fire at a distance, relying on overwhelming numbers. It fought like a predator. It ripped through their formation, weaving between ships, dodging weapons fire with impossible precision. Each shot it fired counted. Every blast tore through hulls, bypassing shields as if they didn't exist. The Dominion's once unbreakable fleet fell apart in minutes. The planetary defense grid tried to lock onto the warship, tried to track it, but it was too fast, too advanced, too deadly. By the time their orbital cannons had calibrated, the warship had already destroyed them. One by one, Outpost Zeta 9's defenses were ripped apart. Within 30 minutes, a base that had stood for centuries was nothing but debris. The Dominion fleet, *** 20 ships strong, *** reduced to ashes. And then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the warship vanished, back into the void, leaving behind only one thing. A message, one that played on every Dominion channel, one that sent chills through every soldier, every officer, every leader. A simple voice, cold and controlled. You are not invincible. We are not extinct. And this is only the beginning. The Dominion's response. Panic. For the first time in their long reign, the Dominion panicked. Zeta 9 wasn't just a military loss. It was a humiliation. How could a single ship, a human ship, tear through their most fortified outpost as if it were nothing? The Dominion High Command demanded answers. Their best scientists analyzed the footage, trying to understand the warship's technology. Their admirals gathered, discussing how to counter this new enemy. But there was a problem, a terrifying problem. They knew nothing about it. The warship left no wreckage. It left no survivors. Every Dominion fleet it engaged was completely wiped out. Their weapons couldn't track it. Their defenses couldn't stop it. And the warship wasn't fighting a war. It wasn't trying to conquer. It wasn't demanding surrender. It was hunting. One by one, it was eliminating Dominion strongholds. Not in a chaotic, random fashion, but strategically, methodically. It was breaking the Empire apart, piece by piece. And the more they tried to stop it, the more they realized the truth. This wasn't just a warship. It was a ghost. A nightmare crafted in the dark, built for one purpose. To erase them. The war spreads. The Dominion tried everything. They doubled their security patrols. They issued a galactic-wide bounty for the warship's destruction, offering entire planets to anyone who could bring them its wreckage. They even sent entire armadas, hundreds of warships, to hunt it down. None returned. Every fleet sent after the warship was systematically destroyed. And then, something even worse happened. Something the Dominion had never expected. The galaxy took notice. The enslaved races of the Dominion, the species they had conquered, broken, forced into servitude. They saw what was happening. They saw the warship. They heard its message. And for the first time in centuries, they had hope. If humanity had survived, maybe they could fight back too. Revolts began to spread. Planets that had bowed to the Dominion for generations suddenly rose in defiance. And the warship? It fed the flames. It attacked supply lines, crippled communications, sabotaged the Dominion's ability to control its empire. One warship, one ghost, and the Dominion was starting to fall apart. The Nightmare realized. The Dominion's leaders, in their arrogance, had once mocked the idea of human resistance. They had believed humanity was extinct. That belief had cost them fleets. It had cost them entire planets. And now, it was costing them their empire. Because the warship had proven something terrifying, something undeniable, something the Dominion could no longer ignore. Humanity was not dead. They had never been dead. They had simply been waiting, waiting for the right moment, waiting to strike, waiting to make the Dominion pay for what they had done. And now, that time had come. Fear spreads, the silent ghost in the void. The Dominion was afraid. Not just the soldiers, not just the officers, the rulers themselves. For the first time in centuries, they felt something they had never known before. A terror that burrowed into their bones. A realization that haunted their every thought. They had made a mistake that could not be undone. They had left survivors. They had let one ship escape. And now, that ship had become a nightmare. A specter that moved through the void without warning, without mercy. They called it Ghost. A phantom that struck from the shadows and disappeared before anyone could react. A force they couldn't predict, couldn't track, couldn't stop. And worst of all, they didn't even know where it was going next. The pattern of destruction. The Dominion tried to understand it. They pored over star maps, battle reports, hyperspace routes, anything that could help them predict the warship's movements. But there was no pattern, no logic, no strategy they could understand. It would strike in the farthest outer reaches, wiping out an isolated fleet. Then, days later, it would appear at the heart of their trade networks, destroying convoys before slipping away. Then a military base. Then a weapons factory. Then a communication hub. Each attack crippled them. Each battle left no survivors. The warship wasn't just fighting a war. It was erasing them. And the worst part? It wasn't doing this alone anymore. The uprising had begun. Rebellion across the stars. The first revolts were small. A handful of prisoners escaping their captors. A few Dominion ships turning on their masters. A minor inconvenience. But the warship fed the flames. It struck where the Dominion was weakest. Liberated entire planets. Then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The oppressed races saw it. And for the first time, they believed, if one ship could stand against the Dominion, why couldn't they? The rebellion spread like wildfire. Entire colonies rose up. Former slaves stole Dominion weapons, fought their overlords, took back their worlds. And still, the warship moved in the darkness, striking, destroying, leading. The Dominion's empire, once unshakable, was starting to collapse. Not all at once, not overnight, but piece by piece. Just like the warship had planned. The Dominion's desperation. The High Lords of the Dominion gathered in secrecy. This was no longer a minor resistance. This was a war, and they were losing. Their fleets were spread too thin. Their control over their colonies was slipping. Their forces, once invincible, were crumbling under the weight of fear. The warship was doing more than destroying them. It was breaking them. Their soldiers refused to patrol the outer reaches. Entire fleets refused to travel without overwhelming reinforcements. And even then, some simply refused to fight. They knew what happened to ships that engaged the warship. There were no victories, no survivors, only silence. The fleet that never returned. The Dominion's rulers had had enough. They gathered their greatest tacticians, their most powerful admirals. They crafted the ultimate trap, a fleet of 500 warships. The largest force ever assembled in the history of the Dominion. A fleet so massive that nothing could stand against it. Not even the warship. They spread word of a vulnerable target, a colony in distress. A fake transmission begging for help. A message meant for the warship to hear. They waited, watched, and then the warship arrived. Alone, silent, outnumbered 500 to 1. The Dominion's fleet sprang the trap. Every gun turned toward the warship. Every ship prepared to fire. And then, it disappeared. One moment it was there, the next gone. The Dominion fleet hesitated, confused. Then, hell erupted. The Ghost strikes back. The warship hadn't come alone. It had brought the rebellion with it. The Dominion's trap became a slaughter. From the shadows, hidden rebel warships, former Dominion vessels, stolen and turned against their masters, ripped through the fleet. The warship reappeared, cutting through enemy ships like a blade through flesh. It was faster, it was stronger, and it was ready. For every Dominion warship destroyed, 100 more fled in terror. The Dominion's greatest fleet, the ultimate trap, was annihilated. Within 2 hours, 500 ships were reduced to nothing. And the warship? Untouched, unstoppable, undeniable. The Dominion's rulers watched in horror. The trap had failed. Their greatest fleet had been erased. And now, they finally understood. They hadn't cornered a dying enemy. They hadn't set a trap for a weakened opponent. They had provoked the storm. And now, it was coming for them. The final message. In the aftermath of the greatest defeat in Dominion history, the warship broadcasted one final message across every Dominion world. A message that sent chills through every ruler, every general, every citizen who had once believed their empire was untouchable. A message spoken in the one language the Dominion had forbidden. Human, your time is over. Silence. Then, we are coming. The final battle, humanity's message. The Dominion was dying. It hadn't fallen yet, not completely, but the cracks had deepened into fractures. Entire sectors had rebelled. The Dominion's fleets, once mighty and unstoppable, were shattered, scattered, and afraid. And worst of all, they had no idea where the warship would strike next. It was no longer a phantom, no longer a rumor. It was real, and now it was coming for them. The last stand. The Dominion's supreme high command, the ruling council that had governed the empire for thousands of years, assembled in secrecy. They were not warriors. They were politicians, warlords who had never held a weapon, never bled on the battlefield. And yet, fear had driven them to desperation. They had one final chance, one last gamble. If they failed here, their empire, their very existence would be erased. And so, they made their final order: defend the capital world at all costs. They recalled every remaining warship to one planet. Not for control, not for order, for survival. If the warship wanted to destroy the Dominion, it would have to come to their throne world. It would have to face the entire remaining fleet. Thousands of warships, planetary cannons, orbital defense stations, an impossible fortress, an impenetrable wall of firepower. They sent the message across the stars. A challenge, a dare. If the warship wanted the Dominion dead, come and finish it. And for a moment, they believed they had won. Because the warship did not respond. For the first time, it did not attack. It did not strike from the shadows. It did not tear apart their fleets in the void. And the Dominion leaders thought perhaps it had fled. That even the warship had limits. That even vengeance had an end. They were wrong. Because the warship was already on its way. The sky burns. The war began before they even knew it. A sudden explosion. An entire Dominion orbital station ripped apart. Then another. And another. The warship had arrived. It did not come alone. The rebellion, the fleets of former slaves, of freed worlds, of the outcasts and the forgotten, had followed. They did not fight for conquest. They did not fight for power. They fought for one thing: the end of the Dominion. And as the battle began, as the Dominion's last fleet scrambled to respond, the warship moved. Faster than anything they had ever seen. More lethal than they had ever imagined. Every shot counted. Every maneuver was perfect. Ships that had survived wars for centuries were torn apart in seconds. The Dominion's capital, their greatest planet, their throne world, became a battlefield. And the warship? It led the charge. The unstoppable force. The Dominion fought. Desperately. They threw everything they had at the warship. Their best ships. Their most powerful weapons. Their elite squadrons. And it didn't matter. The warship dodged their fire like a phantom. It outmaneuvered their admirals. It tore through their formations like a blade through flesh. And all the while, their own forces, their own soldiers, were beginning to break. Because they knew what this was. It wasn't just a battle. It wasn't just a fight for control. This was vengeance. This was justice. And the warship would not stop until every last trace of the Dominion was dust. The death of an empire. The Dominion's capital burned. Their fleet was scattered. Their armies were shattered. And yet, the warship did not stop. It moved through the ruins, searching, hunting, until it reached the palace, the final stronghold, the place where it had all begun. And then, it spoke. For the last time, it broadcasted across the stars. A single message, a voice, cold, human, and filled with finality. This is not your empire anymore. And then, the warship fired. The palace vanished in an explosion of light. The last leaders of the Dominion gone. Their empire erased. Humanity's message. The war was over. The Dominion was no more. The galaxy was free. And the warship? It did not stay. It did not claim power. It did not demand a throne. It had never fought for control. It had never fought for conquest. It had fought for vengeance. And now, its mission was complete. But before it vanished one last time, it sent one final message to the galaxy. A message in a language that had once been forgotten. A message that would be remembered forever. We were never gone. Silence. Then, we were only waiting. And with that, the warship disappeared into the void. Never seen again. Never heard from again. But the galaxy would never forget. Because legends never die.